The night that still makes my face burn didn't start with bullets. It started with a lieutenant leaning out of his track in May, '68, and saying my name like he was doing me a favor. "Get an ambush ready tonight," he said. "South edge of Hoc Mon. Report back at 1800. I walked back to my track and found the squad killing time. Cleaning something that's already clean, smoking, swapping jokes that weren't funny anymore. Bird was perched on an ammo crate. Real name Boyd, but nobody called him that. Smallest man in the squad, tough as rebar, with this habit of acting mean and then giggling like he couldn't help it. In a firefight, Bird never giggled. Whitey sat opposite him, calm in that way that made you trust him. Whitey didn't get loud, didn't get dramatic. He just watched, listened, and did what needed doing. I pulled them in close and laid it out. 9 of us, moving ambush outside a no-name hamlet. Step off at 2100. Standard 3 teams. Bird wanted point, so I put him there. Whitey took trail. I stayed right behind Bird with my RTO, because if the night went bad, I wanted to see it first and talk to the perimeter fast. The M60 team filled the middle element, heavy and quiet. We did the quick what-ifs for the newer guys. What if we take fire? What if we lose the trail? What if someone freezes? The answers were the same answers we'd said 100 times, but saying them again made us feel less naked. Then came the hours you can't explain to people who weren't there. The waiting, the checking, the rechecking. Magazines topped off. Claymores accounted for. Straps adjusted. When the sun slid down, the perimeter changed personality. Daytime Vietnam pretends it's just a place. At night, it tells the truth. At 2100, we slipped out. Bird used the starlight scope before we took a single step, panning slow, left to right, left to right. I felt impatience flicker in me and smothered it. You can't blame a man for being careful, not out here. We made our first jump, about 150 meters, then froze. Bird's hand came up flat in the stop signal, and everyone melted into the ground. I could hear my own breathing, and the faint click of a sling settling against a buckle. An hour in, I crawled up to Bird. "Hold! Sitrep!" I backed to my RTO and pressed the handset to my ear, watch face glowing pale in the dark. On the hour, the tracks checked in first, one by one, all negative. Quiet. Normal. Then 20 called for us. "If you have a negative sitrep, break squelch twice." I clicked twice. Confirmation came back. I crawled forward and whispered, "All good. Move." We leapfrogged like that. Crawl, stop, scope, jump, until we were close enough that the starlight scope mattered. The closer we got, the longer Bird stayed frozen, staring into the black like he could pull a shape out of it by force. 10 minutes before the next check-in, I crawled up beside him. "What have you got?" Bird didn't turn his head. He kept the scope to his eye, breathed once, and his voice came back thin and tight. "There's 2 of 'em out in the open," he whispered. "And more, on the other side of that screen." My stomach tightened like someone had cinched a wire around it. In one sentence, the ambush stopped being a plan and became a problem. I slid backward on my elbows and knees, trying to make my body small enough to disappear into the dirt. Every sound suddenly felt loud. Cloth on leaf litter, a canteen tab tapping plastic, the soft rasp of someone swallowing. The arter was waiting with the handset half raised, eyes wide like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. I leaned in, lips almost touching his ear. "Pass it back," I breathed, "and tell Whitey to crawl up to us. Quiet." Then I did the thing you always do when you're trying not to show fear. I made my voice sound normal. When 20 called, I didn't click twice. I clicked once. A single click, like a knuckle on a door. On the other end of the line there was a pause, long enough that my heartbeat started pushing against my throat. Then Steve Alvarado, up in the TC hatch back at the perimeter, came in low and sharp. "Confirm?" I ducked under a towel, our little radio cave, the only way to keep whispers from carrying, and spoke into the handset like the wire was a lifeline. "Contact, multiple, possibly 5+. They're close. Bird has eyes." It didn't take long for the tone to change. You could feel it, even through a handset. The perimeter wasn't a bunch of half-asleep guys anymore. It was a machine waking up. "Roger," 20 said. "Perimeter is quiet. Everyone's up. Reaction ready. You make the call." Those words, "you make the call," weighed about as much as the ruck on my back. Whitey reached us in a slow, careful crawl, and I pressed my mouth near his ear. Bird's got movement ahead. Our side of the screen and the far side. Could be bay down. Whitey didn't react the way I did. No flash of panic, no sudden anger. He just nodded once like he'd been expecting this all along. "Orient the squad," I whispered. Axis of danger is straight through that vegetation. He slid away without another word, moving like a man who'd done this too many times and hated it every time. I crawled up to Bird again. He shifted the starlight scope slightly, patient as a hunter. 3 now," he whispered. "On our side, and more shapes on the other side. They're moving back and forth." The words hit me like cold water. Back and forth meant they were organizing. It meant they were aware of something. It meant we might have walked our 9 men right up to the edge of somebody else's plan. I crawled back to the towel, relayed it to 20. There was a beat. Then, "We do nothing fast. We do nothing dumb. You and me initiate any move. Copy?" "Copy. First step is your deployment. Second step is engines. You call it." I came out from under the towel and found Whitey again. He had the squad stretched into the best shape he could manage without letting anyone stand up, without letting anyone clink metal, without letting fear turn into noise. 9 men, each one a little island of breathing and sweat. I did a slow crawl down the line, touching shoulders, getting eyes. The new guys looked like they were trying not to blink. The M60 man had his jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. Bird's giggle was gone. Gone like it had never existed. I kept whispering the same lie, because sometimes a lie keeps you from shaking apart. Help is seconds away. Reactions awake. We're not alone. Inside, I was shaking hard enough I could feel it in my fingertips. Midnight came, and we should have been in our ambush site an hour earlier. Instead, we were stuck in the worst place to be, halfway between moving and set, close enough to see shapes, but not close enough to understand them. I crawled up to Bird one more time. He stayed behind the scope for a long moment, then whispered, "They're settling. 2 still up. Rest are down for sure. Bedded down." The words should have made me feel better. Instead, it made the fear tighten. Because bedded down meant they weren't leaving. It meant the night wasn't going to solve itself. I crawled back, found the towel again, and 20's voice was already waiting. "We're going to start engines in 5, he said. "Sometimes that'll spook 'em. Sometimes they'll beat feet." I swallowed. My tongue felt thick and useless. "Copy." I sent Whitey halfway up toward Bird to pass the word, then waited, staring into the dark like I could force it to explain itself. 5 minutes felt like 50. Then far off at first, a low rising growl. Diesels turning over. And my gut sank because it sounded way too close. The sound rolled through the night like something waking up under the earth, a deep mechanical rumble that wasn't supposed to be part of the jungle. It vibrated in my ribs, made the leaves feel thinner, made the darkness feel less like nature and more like a stage. For half a second, my brain did what it always did under stress. It tried to lie to me. That's ours. That's fine. That's the perimeter. They're just starting engines. We're safe. But the distance didn't match. The rumble wasn't faint enough. It didn't have that far-away quality like thunder you can ignore. It felt like it was coming from behind my teeth. I pulled myself back under the towel and got 2-0 again. "Engines are up," he said, controlled. "Any reaction?" I pressed the handset tight, like I could squeeze courage out of it. "Stand by. I'm checking." I crawled forward, belly scraping dirt. My world narrowed to the tiny slice of terrain in front of my nose. A stick, a root, a puddle, a black shape that might be a rock, or might be a boot, or might be the reason you don't get to see morning. Bird was still prone, scope up. Whitey was halfway between us, and that's when I saw it. Whitey wasn't crawling anymore. He was walking. Not upright, not fully, more like a half-crouch, knees bent, back angled like he was sneaking through tall grass. But he was using his feet, making actual steps, in the dark, toward me. Every hair on my neck stood up. I went cold from the inside out. Because nobody does that. Not when you've got unknown bodies 30, 40 yards ahead. Not when the night is already full of shapes. Not when one snapped twig could turn into muzzle flashes. Whitey reached me like it was a joke he'd heard before. He stopped close enough I could smell him. Sweat, stale chow, damp earth. He leaned in and I could see his face in the faintest starlight. Calm, almost amused. And then he chuckled. Not loud, not even a laugh. Just a little breath that had humor in it. "You didn't know, did you?" he whispered. My mouth opened, and nothing came out. My mind was still back on the hedgerow, counting shapes, imagining rifles, imagining a flare popping and turning us into 9 statues in a white spotlight. Whitey nodded toward the screen of vegetation like he was pointing out a landmark on a map. "Buffalo," he murmured. "Water buffalo. That's what birds got you spun up over." For a moment, I honestly didn't understand the words. Buffalo didn't fit in my mental picture of the night. Buffalo belonged in daylight, in a postcard. Big dumb shapes in a rice paddy, slow tails flicking flies, some kid watching them. But then it clicked, and the sensation was worse than fear. Relief hit first, so hard it almost made me dizzy, like my body had been holding a fist clenched around my heart and suddenly let go. And right behind it came heat, embarrassment, rage at myself, rage at Bird, rage at the whole ridiculous situation. Because I had just whispered "contact multiple" into a handset like I was calling the start of a firefight. I had just put the whole troop on edge over livestock. Whitey leaned closer, voice still low, still controlled. "Bird's always been scared of 'em," he said. "Can't stand the sound, can't stand the shapes. They bed down in bunches, and you see horns move, and your brain fills in the rest." I stared past him at the vegetation. I could almost picture it now. Big, blunt bodies pressed into the grass, 1 or 2 standing, shifting weight, a horn tipping like a helmet edge. In the starlight, with a scope, it probably looked exactly like men moving in and out of cover. I turned toward Bird's position, and I could feel the humiliation rising in my throat like bile. Under the towel, I got 2-0 again. My voice sounded different now, tight, careful, like I was walking barefoot on glass. "Scrub it," I whispered. "False alarm. Buffalo." There was a pause on the line, a long one, not angry, not surprised, just heavy. Then 20 exhaled through his nose. I could hear it, a sound that said he'd been in this war long enough to be embarrassed by nothing, and still embarrassed anyway. "Roger," he said. "Scrub, bring him home." I came out from under the towel and looked at Whitey. He gave me the smallest shrug in the world, like this was just another Tuesday. And in that moment, the night flipped again. No longer a hair-trigger gunfight waiting to happen, but a different kind of danger. The danger of walking back into your own perimeter with your pride dragging behind you like a broken strap. We pulled out like thieves, leaving our own mistake behind. No firefight, no flares, no screaming. Just 9 men in the dark, untangling themselves from a night that had been wound too tight and then snapped for the dumbest reason imaginable. Whitey took point on the way back like he always did when things got weird. Quiet competence, no commentary. He didn't rub it in. That almost made it worse. If he'd cracked a joke right then, I could have laughed and let the air out. Instead, he moved like a man who knew exactly how fragile confidence could be, and he refused to step on mine while it was still wet cement. 20 had ordered the ambush scrubbed, but the way the troop reacted told the real story. You could feel it even without seeing it. Engines starting back at the perimeter, guys standing to, hatch guns swung out, eyes fixed into the black like they were staring at a problem that had teeth. And then? Nothing. Just that slow, awkward unwind as everybody realized the crisis had evaporated. I crawled forward and found Bird. He was still on his belly like he'd grown into the dirt. Starlight scope held in front of his face, breathing shallow, shoulders tight. When I touched his boot to get his attention, he flinched hard enough to make my stomach drop again. Not because I was scared now, because it told me how scared he'd been. "Move," I whispered. "We're pulling back." He didn't answer. He just nodded, like a child who'd been caught and didn't want to admit he'd been caught. On the way in, I put him on the trail. Not point, not where he could stop and scope and stop and scope until the night turned into a prison. Trail. Right behind me, where he could feel the squad around him and stop playing chess with shadows. He hated that. Bird's tough guy routine didn't work when you moved his chess pieces. He started to whisper something, excuse, explanation, a little anger, but it came out thin and shaky, like a radio with a dying battery. Whitey glanced back once, just to look over his shoulder. Bird shut up. We moved fast on the return. Not reckless, but purposeful, the kind of pace you keep when you want distance between you and your own embarrassment. The jungle didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt like it was listening. And the worst part was, I couldn't even be mad at the jungle. Because if you stripped the buffalo out of the story, what was left was still real. The fear was real. The tension was real. The planning, the weight distribution, the what-ifs, the claymores, the radio check-ins. None of that was pretend. We'd done everything right the way you're supposed to do it, and the night had still made fools out of us. That's the thing nobody tells you about those long nights. Your imagination isn't your friend. It's a weapon. It points at whatever it can find. A shadow becomes a man. A horn becomes a rifle barrel. The sound of a buffalo shifting in the grass becomes boots and whispers and the click of a bolt. And once your brain commits to that picture, it's hard to tear it down. The picture takes control. You start making decisions based on a story your fear wrote for you. Back at the perimeter, the wire came into view like a miracle. Dark shapes, faint silhouettes of tracks, the hard geometry of sandbags and berms. The distant hum of engines faded into the normal background noise of being alive in a place designed to kill you. We slipped in without anyone cheering. No one said, "Good job." No one said, "Nice work." They didn't have to. The entire troop knew we'd all just been wound up for a fight that never existed, and there was an unspoken rule in units like ours. You don't embarrass your own people if you expect them to keep going out tomorrow night and the next. But that didn't stop the shame from sitting on my shoulders like extra gear. When we got back to our track, Bird climbed up and sat there stiff, staring into nothing. Whitey tossed his rifle down and started checking his magazines, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I stood a little apart, listening to the perimeter sounds, and the thought hit me. Quiet, cruel, impossible to ignore. Tonight could have been the one night it actually was men in the grass, and we would have been ready to die for it. That's what made it stick. Not that we'd been fooled, that we'd been fooled by something harmless, using the same fear that saves you when it's not. And I knew, even then, that this would become a story we told new guys with a grin. After enough time passed, after enough real nights stacked on top of it to make it feel smaller. But in that moment, all I could hear in my head was Bird's whisper. There's two of them, and my own heartbeat answering like it had believed every word. It didn't turn into a joke right away. That's what people don't get. They think the punchline cancels the fear, like you can just laugh and the whole thing becomes harmless. But fear doesn't work like that. Fear doesn't care if you were right. Fear cares that your body believed it. We were back inside the perimeter, and the night had settled again, but my hands wouldn't stop sweating. My tongue felt thick. My stomach was still knotted like I'd swallowed a rope. Even with the wire between us and the dark, my pulse stayed high, like my body was waiting for the part where the enemy finally stepped out of the grass and proved it hadn't been stupid to be scared. Bird sat on the track, elbows on his knees, head down. He didn't look tough now. He looked small. Not physically. He always looked small. But in that other way, the way a man looks when he realizes he's just shown everyone the one crack in his armor. I climbed up and crouched beside him. I could have chewed him out. I could have let the anger out, dumped it on him, made him wear it like a rucksack. It would have felt good for about 10 seconds. But I'd seen Bird in a firefight. He might have been a clown when things were calm, but when bullets started coming, he tightened up. He did his job. He didn't freeze. He didn't fold. You don't throw away a man like that because his nerves got the better of him on a night the jungle played tricks. So I kept my voice low. "You okay?" I asked. He didn't answer at first, just stared at the dirt like it had written something he didn't want to read. Then, barely audible, he said, "I saw 'em." I nodded. "You thought you saw 'em." His jaw worked, like he was chewing a piece of shame he couldn't swallow. "Same thing through that scope," he muttered. And he wasn't wrong. Through a starlight scope, the world got eerie. Green glow. Highlights where there shouldn't be highlights. Shapes that moved like people because your brain wanted them to. That scope didn't just show you the night, it gave your fear better lighting. Whitey climbed up behind us, sat on the edge of the hatch. He didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't even look at Bird. He just lit a cigarette with hands so steady it made me resent him a little. "You know why I knew?" he said, voice calm, casual. Bird didn't look up. "Because they stink," Whitey continued. "People stink different, even VC. Buffalo stink like a barn fell over. You learn it." He exhaled smoke into the dark and finally glanced down at Bird. Not cruel, not friendly, just factual. And because if it was people, they'd have been gone the second they heard engines. Nobody beds down that close to our line unless they're planning something real stupid or real bad. That landed heavier than any insult. It reminded us why we'd been tight for hours, because sometimes it is real bad. Sometimes you don't get a punchline. Bird's shoulders slumped. Whitey flicked ash and added, almost gently. You didn't kill anybody. You didn't get anybody killed. Learn the lesson and move on. That was Whitey. Always a teacher, even when he didn't mean to be. Later, when the dawn started to lighten the sky like someone turning up a dimmer switch, the lieutenant called me over. He didn't yell. He didn't lecture. He had that look officers get when they've decided to pretend something didn't happen because it's better for the unit if it didn't happen. "How'd it go?" he asked, neutral. "Negative," I said. "Scrubbed." He nodded once. Okay. That was it. No debrief, no why, no report that said, "Ambush aborted due to water buffalo," because some things don't belong on paper. But the story still lived. It lived in the way Bird didn't volunteer for point the next week. It lived in the way the new guys started asking, "You ever see buffalo out here?" with too much seriousness. It lived in the way the men who had been scared didn't laugh right away. And eventually, yes, it became the thing you told the replacements to teach them. The jungle wasn't just trees and trails. It was a mind game. "One night," you'd say, grinning like you didn't care. 9 men, 0 shots fired, and we were ready to die. Then you'd pause. "And the enemy?" you'd add. And you'd let them lean in, hungry for a fight story, for blood and heroics. You'd nod toward the paddies and finish it. "Biggest damn water buffalo you ever saw." They'd laugh. Because they could. Because they weren't the ones lying in the dirt with their heart tripping like a hammer, convinced horns were rifles and the darkness was full of men. But every time I told it, the same thing happened inside me. That first fear came back for a split second, sharp as a snapped twig. And I'd remember the real lesson. Not that we'd been fooled. That we'd been ready. And out there, sometimes being ready is the only line between a humiliating story and a name nobody says anymore.